Screen. Stay on the screen.
Okay, good. Thanks for the opportunity to give a brief update here at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. My name is Alan Seltzer. I'm a scientist here, and I run a group that specializes in dissolved gases in water. We had the pleasure of working with various members of the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee over the last year to plan and ultimately pull off this field campaign in May, and since then to start analyzing these samples that we collected. So the broad focus of this project is to look at the groundwater geochemistry in the aquifer to answer a few main questions. And that's the slide here. So the main project goals are really to understand the age of the water. So how old is the deepest groundwater? That is, how long has it been in the system since it first, entered from the surface as rain or snow? Under what conditions did it originally enter the aquifer? What was the environmental temperature? What was the elevation? What was the water level? Right? How deep was the groundwater below the surface? And what can we learn about these different geochemical tracers, as we'll call them in a second? What can we learn from these tracers about past water levels and regional climate history? So our approach to do this is to use what I like to call natural passive tracers. So these are things we can measure. They have geochemical signatures that we'll call them, but these are chemical constituents of groundwater that we can analyze in various labs that are already in the ground. So we're not adding anything, we're not hazardous or anything like that. And it's a really nice way of being able to just look at the chemistry of water as it is and understand something about the history of this aquifer from a hydrogeological or climate perspective. And so I'll sort of go through a couple of these now and then share an update on where we are in the sort of analytical process. So one of the most exciting things that we are able to measure with these samples that we collected in May is called Krypton 81. And this is a really exciting new tool that has historically been very, very hard to measure. And so we are partnering with Argonne National Lab outside of Chicago to be able to use a new technique to make these measurements very precisely. All you need to know really about why this is cool is that Krypton 81 is an extremely rare isotope in our atmosphere. It's produced naturally through cosmic rays interacting with gases in our atmosphere. And just to give you a sense of how rare this is, 1 out of every 10 million trillion atoms of gas in our atmosphere is a Krypton 81. So it's extremely rare, and therefore it's really hard to measure. It has a half-life of 229,000 years. And so what that means is that the krypton that's produced in the atmosphere dissolves into groundwater when the groundwater first enters the subsurface, slowly starts to decay as the groundwater sits around in the aquifer. And so we can use it as a way of dating the groundwater and figuring out how long it's been in the subsurface by measuring how much Krypton 81 is left relative to what the groundwater started with. And just for an example then of what this means, that if we were to measure 94% of the Krypton 81 relative to the initial abundance, that would be consistent with 20,000 years of residence time in the air. And so this new technique at Argonne allows us to make these measurements now at something like a precision of 1%, which is really exciting. And so this will be the first high precision measurements of Krypton 81 in groundwater anywhere in the world. And we were able to collect 14 samples in May. So those results are pending, but we're very excited about it. Another thing we're able to do in various labs here, including my own at Woods Hole Oceanographic, is to reconstruct the temperature and the depth of the water when groundwater first enters the surface. And so how do we do that? We use noble gases. If you think back to your high school chemistry class, these are the elements on the far right-hand side of the periodic table, you can see here. And they're really great passive natural tracers. They exist naturally in our atmosphere. They naturally dissolve into groundwater at low levels. And they're totally inert and unreactive, which means that chemistry and biology in the aquifer don't affect them. So they're really good tracers of physics and physical parameters and processes. Just to give you an idea very briefly of what we can do with this, helium-4 and argon-40 noble gas isotopes, they build up over time. Again, they're not harmful in any way, they're very trace. But they're very useful because they tell us about the age of groundwater. So you can think of them as clocks that tick forward, unlike Crypt-91, which decays and gets backward. So they give us some complementary information about the age of groundwater. And then the abundances of the noble gases, just the total amount of neon, argon, krypton, xenon, tells us about the temperature during recharge. Each of them have a different degree of solubility, right? So a different amount dissolves as a function of temperature. So in colder water, let's say there's more xenon than in warmer water, and that signal gets locked in when the groundwater first enters the subsurface and so forth. So we can figure out what the temperature was during recharge by looking at the amount of noble gases in deep groundwater today. And then finally, we can look at the different stable isotopes. Without getting into too many of the technical details, just the ratio of how much the heavy versus light isotopes tells us about basically how deep the water table was below the surface when the groundwater first entered during the recharge at the time and place where that groundwater recharge happened. And so this is an interesting tool to look at past hydrological. So in May, the week of May 8th, we came out and we had a really efficient week in the Moscow-Pullman area. We sampled 18 different wells. Thanks very much to all of you and your colleagues who helped us make this happen. We measured the pH, temperature, dissolved oxygen, and a couple other parameters. These are available, and of course we will share all of our data with you once the data set is finalized. Although I'm sure you have records of all of these different parameters already. And we collected samples from each of these wells that were then shipped off for analysis in 3 different labs at WHOI, that's the shorthand for Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, labs at Argonne National Lab, at Chicago, University of Utah, and University of New Hampshire. And to give you a brief status update, so the noble gas isotopes that I talked about, which are useful for understanding the water level of the past and also the age of the water, those are measured in my lab.